Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner. We've got a great group here this week to talk to us about voting in Crown, one of our elephant in the room topics. Be sure if you have any questions, drop them in the Facebook comments. These guys will try and answer as many as they can. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Viscount Tristan to get it started.
Thank you, Saib. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a great chat tonight. We're kind of going to start off in the direction of talking about the concept of voting in Crown. And a lot of people have heard the term ducal prerogative. And it's one of those questions that a lot of people want to know the answer to, but maybe are a little too shy to ask. Different kingdoms have different conventions, and we're going to get into talking about some of those. We have some very experienced people here from different areas of the known world, but we also want to invite questions and comments from people in other kingdoms where conventions may be different. If you have questions about how things are done in your kingdom, or you're going to hear some of these people talk about how this, what would you call it, a ritual or a tradition, I guess, would be, how it applies in their kingdom may be a little bit different in yours. So we really love questions. Don't be shy. There's no stupid question, even though you might be a little shy to ask it. So with that, we'll get started with talking about the idea of voting in Crown, which it's often said that everybody has a vote who enters Crown tournament, because you have the ability to win, or you have the possibility of winning that crown. But then there's the ducal prerogatives. So I'm going to toss this to Duke Eliahu, I think is got a lot of great things to say and can enlighten some of us on the history of where this ducal prerogative concept came from. So, Your Grace.
Thank you. So years ago, I was at Pennsic in my camp, and a good friend of ours, Duke Khan of North Shield, brought a couple of guests into camp. And one of them was Duke Henrik of Hound. And the other person was from the same era. I've unfortunately forgotten his name. And His Grace is one of the first dukes of the society and was there from the beginning. And he recalled that the way he told the story to me is that the person who won the tournament, because it wasn't a crown tournament yet, it was just a tournament, the person who won the tournament had to find the site and organize the next tournament, essentially the old term autocrat, the next tournament. And he had won crown, he had won the tournament twice, and everybody who'd been knighted was expected to fight in crown tournament, and he didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to autocrat the next crown. So he said, no, my prerogative as a duke is that I don't have to do that anymore. I've given my time. Well, I'd heard other things about ducal prerogative. I'd heard over the years that it was the prerogative that a duke had to enter crown without the intention of winning, but to keep somebody they didn't think should win from winning. So as we were talking about this episode, recalling that story, I went online and I found a publication called The History of the Kingdom of the West, being a description of events and courts annotated by a variety of folk who were there. And this volume 1, the first 12 and a half years, was written by Master Wilhelm von Schlüssel and copyrighted in 1983, and the annotated version published in 2001. And it was self-published. It's available for download. I can put a link after this in the comments so anybody can look at it. But I looked this up, and it's really fascinating because the people who were there have different recollections. As you might expect, people remember things that happened 50, 55 years ago differently. Well, in the end of it, there's an appendix that has a lot of question and answer. And one of the questions was about ducal prerogative. And they were discussing this. And I read it. There's 6 pages just on this topic. And nowhere could I find, and I may have missed it, but nowhere could I find anyone mention that it was so you didn't have to autocrat the next event. But what they did say is there was an expectation that if you were present at what then became a crown tournament, you had a duty to fight in it. And the prerogative was to not enter. The ducal prerogative was to not enter the crown tournament, not to be there, but not have to fight. Eventually, so the recollections go, this was evolved into, I can be there and fight, but not in the tournament. So I can have my armor, I can fight, I can do pickups or whatever. They commented on the idea that that some kingdoms heard of this and said, oh, as a duke, I can enter and withdraw when I choose to. Well, anyone can withdraw from a tournament at any time, but the idea was that your intention was to enter and specifically to keep somebody from winning and then withdraw. So entering without the intention of elevating the person you're fighting for to the throne. And while the recollections of I'll call them the founders, differ on a lot of things, they all agree on thinking this is a really bad idea and not really understanding how it changed into that. They discuss whether there are some motivations for doing that, but ducal prerogative simply meant, hey, I've done it before. I don't have to enter now. I'm under no obligation to enter a crown tournament, not that I can enter and withdraw. Now, all kingdoms have lots of different traditions. And I'd say the one thing that's consistent is that every kingdom has some control over who enters or who wins. And if a kingdom has an open crown, so they don't have control over who enters, they often have a control over who wins because people will enter, dukes often, to control that. So that's some of the background on this. And I have my own thoughts about this. And the 3 kingdoms I've lived in, the Middle, Meridies, and Ethelmark, all think that if you're, the tradition there is that, or the philosophy, the understanding, all of that is that if you're entering crown, you have to be prepared to win. You should be entering because you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it to elevate the person you're fighting for to the throne. And so the idea that you would enter for any other reason is considered an inappropriate philosophy with which to be entering crown tournament. So that's some of the background. So who else would like to pick this up from there?
That's a great description to launch it from, because over the years I've heard many rumors, and when you hear a story about, well, what is ducal prerogative, and somebody says, well, a duke can just enter crown tournament at any time during the tournament, and he can extract himself at any time during the tournament.
I've heard that one too. They don't have to enter it. Don't have to enter at the beginning. They can enter.
They can just jump and say, I want to be in this round, and I'll go in. I mean, I think it kind of, the mystique of it made it grow legs and become its own mystical thing. And I'm sure there's many other rumors about what ducal prerogative is, and of course, as people sit and chat and they speculate, and they will take a bit of half truth and they'll mix it with something that sounds pretty reasonable.
Well, do we know if that one is a myth or a reality?
What's that?
I mean, do we know? I mean, because that's the main one I think of too. Duke so-and-so enters Crown because he doesn't like how something's going, and he enters Crown at, say, round 4, and he makes sure he gets, he puts a loss, or he puts out the person that, Duke so-and-so believes doesn't need to be in the list anymore, and then he bows out,
Sure.
So is this actually happening? Has it ever happened?
That's a good question.
It's a good question for whoever's listening, because I have heard that rumor, but I've never seen it happen, and I've never specifically heard of an example of it.
Right. What I have heard and seen is high caliber fighters that know, they look over the list of combatants and they say, all right, I'm going to enter this crown. And they will be openly say, because I don't want to have this person win or that other person win. Now,
So
this is very
before
rare.
I'd like to bring Sven in, but before we do so, I think it's super important that we understand that different doesn't mean wrong. Different just means that's how some other kingdom does something. And, you'd really have to, really dig down and try to understand things, I think, really openly before we could actually throw a value judgment of, well, they do it wrong. I had to learn this, the hard way coming up my whole life. I coming from Meridias, which was one of the lightest kingdoms in the world, and then being next door to Atlantia, which is one of the more, at the time, higher calibrating. And also, you could not ever say anything. You couldn't talk about blows. You couldn't talk about blows without someone saying you're questioning my honor. So I forever thought that was wrong. And it wasn't until I mellowed with age that I understood that it was just different. And once I understood that it was different and accepted it as not necessarily being wrong, I got along so much better with my Atlantean counterparts. And we found all the common ground that, we didn't even know we had because we were too busy at each other's throats. And, and then some lifelong friendships have been made for it. So before we bring in someone who does it, who has kingdoms that, is more, perhaps does some variation of ducal prerogative or, voting in crown. I just want it to be really, really make sure that we highlight that, it's not wrong. It's just different.
I think that's really important.
Value judgment issue.
That's a really important point, Eleanor. Thank you. Because, and I found that too, moving to different kingdoms, have different ways of doing things. Kingdoms even have different perceptions or different understanding of what constitutes an event. And the more we can focus on what we have in common, the more we remain one society instead of splintering into a whole bunch of different ones. I think the discussion about philosophy and the approach to issues is always enlightening. But if you approach it, as you're saying, if you approach it saying, well, here's how we do it and we do it right. There are people who still consider me a newcomer in the SCA who were around when I started, who always keep saying, well, back in my day when we did it right, things change, things evolve. You're either you're guiding the growth and evolution of where you live, or you're going to get run over by it. So I think that, it's a really important point not to exercise a value judgment, but to understand the reasons that things are done. I thought it was important to provide a historical starting point to see where this began, this idea, and then so we can understand the context of in which these ideas morphed as they traveled around kingdoms. For example, I saw another point there in when I was reading this, that one of the early rules of the list, when they were developing rules of the list, was a thrusting tip can only be on a two-handed weapon or a short sword, because it's not a broadsword with a thrusting tip can't be controlled well enough to be used safely, the thrusting tip. And I saw over the years how that morphed into from unsafe to unchivalrous. So, and I've seen those changes. So rules may start for one reason and then change into something else. And so it is with something that's in a lot of ways, almost an offhand comment, it's my prerogative, I don't have to fight, can change into other things. And I think it's fascinating the way it's like a big game of telephone, right? Particularly in those days when communication was in person, by telephone, or by letter. There was no email, there was no social media. It was very different. And the society spread at science fiction conventions. So yeah, it was a very different time. And so it was easy for ideas to evolve, morph, change.
Sure. Sven, we wanted to toss this to you and get your thoughts on the ducal prerogative thing in your perspective.
Well, obviously, everybody knows that we have a ducal prerogative in Outstore, and it was a very common thing when I came in. I've been playing about 11 years now, for 8, I guess, and it was pretty common. I've ducal 3 times since I won. Basically, here it's you come across somebody you think would make a good crown, you just step out of the way for them. There was actively voting. That's what everybody sees it as, but it's just part of our big tradition. I get to see it a bunch long before I was able to do it, obviously. It's just part of our kingdom tradition. It's hard to get away from that. I, for the longest time, preached all my guys to fighting crown because I think it's important to have your say, and people complain a lot less if you get killed by the guy who's going to be king. It makes it a lot easier in the overall. But
Sure.
I more recently have this last crown I fought in. I fought it because it was an off-weapon style. Just fought in it for fun, and I went to a round 2 along with the other guys. Told them that I was not going to fight in crown for a little bit, take a little time off because I had too much undue influence in who would win, and so I was taking a big break from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's 2 things that come to mind with that point, and one which Eliahu mentioned, and that is in the society rules of combat, no combatant has to fight any bout in any tournament against any opponent. They are always free without any restriction to say, I yield the fight, I'm not going to fight this. And I think what Sven's talking about is a kind of one tradition of the ducal prerogative, but really that is something that any combatant can do, is to say, I think you should go on the tournament, but I'm going to yield, and I don't even need a reason. You can state one if you would like, but there will never be any punishment for somebody who says, I just don't want to fight this fight and I'm going to yield. Yep. They will take a loss, but it is what it is. And I think the second point comes to the influence part. Whereas, like a 1-year or 2-year fighter that does that, he probably won't even get to the semifinals or the finals or something like that. Whereas a Duke, there's a good chance that they have the skill to get to the semifinals, and they have the horsepower to basically provide a number of losses for other combatants in the tournament. And that's why it's viewed as kind of more than, or slightly more important, more gravity for a Duke to do it, or a knight or royal peer, than it would be for just an average guy that says, I'm going to enter the tournament, and maybe I'll be the one person that I can give this person that I'd like to see win the tournament. I'll just give them the fight, and by yielding. But it's in the rules. There's nothing that compels a combatant to fight or fight a bout that they do not want to. And I think that's important to understand. But I do think that there is, and like what you were talking about, Sven, with the image that, you're a royal peer Duke, you've entered a tournament, and then you back out, that people will perceive that as being like you're being a spoiler. But I also wanted to bring up within this point of there are different ways that crown tournaments are structured and run that kind of do something very similar, but people don't normally see it.
That's what I was going to jump with.
Go right ahead. I'll pass that one to you then.
All our crown tournaments are best 2 out of 3 single elim, and your bye is also destructive. Mm-hmm. And it's usually one of the better fighters who's not in crown tournament. And it has a little heavy influence coming across the bye. that way. Sorry about that. All three times I've dukeled, people cheered for it, depending on the outcome, because people want to see new people win. They want to see someone else be successful. And I've dukeled to a count and actually 2 counts and one night, because I thought they would make a good crown. And
Just out of
here's-
curiosity, when did those wind up happening in the tournament? Was it early in the early rounds, or did it happen later?
The first one I fought with Sword and Shield. In the next one I dukeled in the semis, and then a few years later, also in the semis to a count, and then this last one, the second round.
Okay.
It's just out.
Do they still do? I actually lived in Anstura back in the 90s, 2 different times, and I was fascinated to learn about how the list was run at that time. And maybe it's not like that now or subsequently, but where I came from was the mid realm, where it was if you were a consort in of one of the combatants, you could never be at the list table. They really separated the running of the list. Like the first round was completely random draw, and then it went into a hard tree. Now,
Here-
when I moved to Anstiora at the time, what they were doing is they would line up all the combatants by order of precedence from, just authorized a week ago to, 3-time Duke on the other end, and they'd take the whole list and they'd fold it in half. So if you were at the bottom rank, you would be fighting the top ranked fighter in the first round. With the theory being, at least this was what was explained to me, was if you're going to win Crown Tournament, you're going to have to defeat the best anyway. So you might as well just get it over with. But then, and this was the most interesting part, once all the winners, and I think it was still single elim at that time, if I remember right, they would take the winners and they would just say, okay, who would be a good bout? And they would, whoever's running the list would just match pair by their own opinion of who they thought should fight each other. So there was, and this was a surprise to me because it introduced the possibility that the people that were running the list table could make a very hard draw for somebody that they didn't care for, who would be fighting some very experienced people all the way up, or they could have somebody they really liked who they could match round by round to have an easier path to the finals.
So
Are
so
things still
traditionally-
like that, or did they evolve?
So traditionally, our first round is challenge up. The lowest OP gets to challenge whoever they want all the way to the end. And it does go random. A lot of people shuffle the cards and mix them, and there definitely could be some of that going on. We just shuffled ours and drew from cards, but they don't do trees here. They don't set them up. They don't see. It's just this last one I fought a Duke in the first round and then a count in the second round.
Sure.
Just depends on how it is.
Okay.
But there's definitely, in the 11 years I've been here, I've never seen a bracket in ground. It's always a shuffle, random shuffle.
Sure. Sure. Ailgheanan, you had a comment.
So I'm going to address a couple of questions that the viewers have, as well as give some examples of voting in Crown ducal prerogative that I've seen, including probably the most inspiring example that I've ever seen. So the first question was I understand the distaste for voting, but isn't anyone who entering Crown list voting no to everyone that they beat? And that is absolutely fair. My very good friend, Duke Gareth LeBruin, used to always have a saying, one stick, one vote, which I always think is funny because it gives someone like Sven 2 votes, and that's not fair. But absolutely, you are advocating for yourself, and in a way, you're saying I would prefer that me and my consort rule rather than you and your consort rule. So at a very basic level, everyone is voting in Crown. The difference is I think, and what we're talking about here is, when you're either lending yourself to the proceedings and to the majesty of things, or when you're acting as a spoiler, or anything in between, lots of different places in between. One of the other questions I think I saw was, has anyone ever dukeled in the finals? And, as His Grace Eliahu said, he's lived in 3 places where voting in Crown, where you're spoiling or whatever, is probably seen as relatively distasteful, but it is in the mid realm where I've seen the most inspiring, most, just magical moment in the finals of Crown that I think I've ever seen. And it's been several years ago, but when Their Majesties Luder and Tessa were on the throne, they noticed that they hadn't got their newsletter, and they were mentioning it to someone at corporate level, and it turns out that one of them had expired, or they had expired together. And that is a huge no-no in the society. The crowns have to be members at all times. And so their reign was stopped. A regent was set up, but because they hadn't done anything, malicious or wrong or anything else, and they had brought it to the attention of the society themselves, they were not punished beyond the straight up, well, your reign has to stop. It could have gone so far as their reign could have been nulled and all the awards they had given, nullified as well. But it didn't go that far, nor were they withheld from any future crowns, including the next crown, which is that really tells you that the board at that time and the Society of Shenandoah did not see this as any actual willfully malicious behavior on their part. And so, they were allowed to fight in the next crown. And I've never seen more mid-realm dukes enter a tournament than that next crown list. And they, whatever they're going to tell you, I don't know. But I know what I saw, which was they cleared the way to make sure that Luder, who might have been able to do it himself, he is a really good fighter, but it turns out Luder and Duke Dog made the final.
Brannis.
And
Brannis.
Dog fought he fought one. You sure? I thought it was Dog.
Dog fought him, but it was before the finals.
Okay.
I'm sorry to
no, that's fine.
harsh your story, but
you were there as well. So
I was in the tournament, and
participating. But the end result is whichever Duke that made it to the finals fought one really good hard fight, and then they said, "Well, you have proven your mettle, and I withdraw, and Your Majesty." And the person was allowed to step up immediately.
Yeah, it was. There's no need to quibble. You have it essentially right. No need to quibble over details. But I know Dog did do that. But the finals, I think, was in the semis. I think the finals was Brannis. That's what I remember. But just like I said about the book, The History of the Kingdom of the West, that was years ago, and my recollection may be faulty. And just to clarify, there was a short lapse in their membership while heirs for like a week while heirs that they corrected, and that's why it was considered, and they brought it to they weren't trying to hide it. So
no, not at all.
So, and maybe it was Dog. I think it was Dog who did that, but I think it was Brannis in the finals. But again, quibbling over details, but I've been grading papers all day. So
either way, it was extremely magical. An extremely magical moment. It was awe-inspiring because everyone felt really strongly that Luder and Tessa, who had done such a fantastic job up to that point, should get the chance to finish their reign. And, so no matter what I think about voting in Crown, I probably would have been moved to vote in that Crown as well.
Sure. Yep. And also, just so the listeners know, as I recall it, it wasn't that they waited 6 months to fight in the next crown. There was an impromptu crown tournament that was scheduled to resolve the matter in short order. I think it was a month or two after.
It wasn't long. Palomar was the regent,
and they had a special crown tournament for that.
Right, and they fought that list, stepped up immediately, and if I remember correctly, right after that same afternoon was the second crown list to actually get heirs.
Okay. Yeah, that could be. It was an extraordinary situation, for sure.
But that's one of the things that opened my heart to the fact that things can be different. In my mind, in the reigns that I have done in Meridier's, I would have been appalled had I have seen anyone actually voting in Crown for anyone other than themselves. So until I saw that opened my heart to the fact that, they could very likely be doing it different and it be just as wonderful, altruistic, and moving. And what Sven has said and what I've seen in On Store and Crowns also, is very cool. It's done. Everyone thinks that it's proper and well and good, and it turns out to be a really neat experience. It's just different than what I would have done. I always said that, I would let anyone who sent in their letter of intent, as long as there wasn't a major issue, fight in Crown List. And I would never hold anyone out of Crown List. But the honest truth is before people started sending in letters, I've asked people not to fight in Crown List when I was on the throne. It's like, don't make me have to turn your letter down, Mm-hmm. So that's a way of, that's the way crowns manage things. And, it's certainly the way it's been done in a lot of kingdoms that I've been in. But,
I think this actually bridges us to a very good topic. And this is something that is, often of interest to people to find out, okay, what about how does Crown Tournament work generally? And that is, it's unlike any other tournament where you just don't walk in the door and sign up and away you go. Kingdoms have certain traditions for allowing participants in. A lot of times kingdoms will have things like knights and royal peers are allowed in whenever they would like to. And if you're not a knight or a royal peer, then you have to write a letter of intent to the crown and they have to approve you. Really looking at it from the crown standpoint, the crown can accept or reject anyone for any reason. At least that's how it was in the mid-realm when I was there and whatnot. All applicants must be acceptable to the current crown. And that is just a fairly standard thing. I remember in Anstiora, I remember seeing at Crown Tournament there where if a squire or somebody who was not a knight wanted to fight, they would have a knight step forward and say, I want to advocate for this person. I think they would be an excellent, they would serve as sovereign and basically a vouch type system. In the mid-realm for a long time, years back, although they don't do it anymore, Crown was invitational for people that were not knights or royal peers, where you were sent a letter or you were put on a list of unbelts that were invited to participate in Crown. And that evolved into something different because it kind of took on a political life of its own, which was, it kind of put pressure on people to go fight in Crown, because if you were invited and you didn't fight, it was felt that, well, I would never be invited again. So you'd have people participating in Crown, not because they wanted to win, but because they wanted to keep being invited. And so, and actually Branus was the one who started to evolve that and change it. And I think he did a brilliant job of creating another venue for unbelts to go show their ambition and their progress and their skill without having to go compete in Crown Tournament. And that was the Tournament of Chivalry. I think it was a great idea as a workaround, because as Eli said, all of these different methods are for the Crown Tournament format are kind of trying to solve a problem, which is to make sure that all the combatants are acceptable to the crown. There's different ways to solve that problem. And there's no one way that's right and other ways that are wrong. It's just different methods of handling it. Anybody have a comment for?
Yeah, I have a comment. So when I was an unbelt, the mid-realm still had the invitational crown list and a list of names of unbelts. Crown list was always 32, double elimination. It's double elimination by kingdom law, and luck of the draw, double elimination, and which relates to another thing. And this is to avoid the appearance of any undue influence by the list table, the crown, anyone, that it is may the best person win. So it's not seeded, it's always luck of the draw, and people who are in the tournament can't be involved in the list table and so on. But I was so there's a list of names published in the newsletter, 32 names of unbelts in order. And but knights could show up the day of and say, I intend to fight. And for every knight who entered, a person was bumped off the end. And I traveled to a crown tournament I was invited in, like 7 hours this crown tournament, and I was the last person in the list. If one more night had entered, I would have traveled all that distance and not gotten in. So I think the change to first, the number was expanded. Everyone who's invited can fight. And then, as you mentioned, Branas said it's letter of intent. One of the comments I have, and I discussed this when I was on the board and we were looking at laws when I was working on kingdom laws, and I was working on corpora, that there is an intentional contradiction in the philosophy of the board about kingdom laws and corpora used to be that there should be there should be some wiggle room. So the idea that a knight can fight by right in crown tournament contradicts the rule of the list that says the crown has the control over who enters the list. And so that was never really clarified, but it certainly has been the case that the crown, in the days of invitational lists in the middle, the crown would contact people who might have a reasonable expectation of being invited and say, you're not going to be invited, or you will be disallowed, or in some cases, the person you're fighting for, you can fight, but not the person that you usually fight for. And so that having letters of intent became in some ways better, but also then because people are expressing an interest in it, and they might be denied, but they're expressing an interest in it rather than not being invited to the party. It was complicated. I think it's a better system now, but things evolve over the years, and it was one way of doing things. And the fact that particular crown tournament was only 7 hours away, it could have been, the kingdom was huge. It was, the kingdom in those days was from southeast Ohio to Calgary, and from southwest Illinois to eastern Ontario. So it was enormous. It'd be 24 hours of driving time. So better system now. But as I mentioned, every kingdom has some kind of control over either who enters, or if it's open, by people going in and controlling who wins. So I think it's better personally, and I know it's a value judgment, to just control who enters and leave it to the luck of the draw and the skill of the day, than to try to manage it within the tournament. I think that should be left to the fighters and the marshals myself, but I'm a product of where I grew up and where I have lived and traveled. And I know others may disagree, and I understand that and accept that. People disagree with me all the time. So,
Ailgheanan, you had a point.
So another example, I'm in Aidenvelt right now, and one of the things that they do in Aidenvelt, which was very new and different to me, is they have a destructive buy fighter, and it is not uncommon for that destructive buy fighter to be ducal level.
Wow. Okay.
And
that's something.
It's like when I first heard that was something that they were doing, I'm like, well, why doesn't the crown just not accept their letter of intent? It's like that's crazy. And because they do some slight manipulations with the list anyway, because they reserve the right to try to keep people who are from the same group fighting each other in the same round, as deep as they can go into the list, which is a nice thought. So it is not, let me say this. If there's someone that the crown doesn't think is ready, that they're not ready and the kingdom's not ready for them, you can almost guarantee that fighter will wind up being a buy against a destructive buy.
Kind
and
of a
someone,
sneaky ducal prerogative.
and it won't be the up and coming, squire that they, let to do some of them. It will be the ducal level guy that comes in and basically is, in a way, is, helping the crown manage their list a little bit. So I'm not saying that it happens every time. I'm not saying that it's completely obvious, but it, wink, wink, nod, nod is definitely part of the system. And so, when I saw that, and experienced it, it was a bit of a shock, and it hit my value judgment filter of this is the wrong way to do things. And then I had to kind of sit back and say, well, it's not your way. Is it really wrong? No, it's just a different way. It's a different system. And you can see that in the society, there's many different ways things are done. The West, for the longest time has been very open with who gets to fight in their crowns. They don't have that long list that most of the other kingdoms do that, disqualifies people before they even get a chance to, send a letter of intent. So you could come in from out of kingdom a lot of times in a lot of the Western crowns and fight. And I know that some of the, people in the West think that, maybe they should have some actual requirements, and other people are like, this is our tradition. Our tradition is great. And so that's an ongoing discussion there about how they want to do things. But I have also very much cognizant of the fact that if Duke so-and-so from some other kingdom goes to the West to fight in their crown list, all the dukes line up who might not have been fighting in crown are suddenly in crown, and they're there to make sure that a Western crown is run by a Western person. It's like, we have this rule, anyone can come and fight. And then they have this sort of secret rule that says, but we're going to make sure we do everything we can that you don't win.
Sure. We did get a question from Facebook very much related to this. And the question was, destructive buy, if it gives one a loss, is it really a buy? And that's a good question.
And well, by the terminology, no.
Right.
We I think sometimes we'll just call any fight where the list did not provide you someone else who's a combatant in a buy fight. And then, so yes, buy normally would mean you that round's not counting.
Now, in that format, was it a single elimination or a double elimination?
It's a double elimination.
Okay, so
but by and large,
risk one loss as opposed to having no losses.
But it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that buy happened after they'd already had a loss.
Okay, right.
I don't know what the magic of the list format was, but somehow it would always turn out that destructive buy fell just exactly where, the kingdom needed it to.
Sure. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons I know that with the mid realm where they do that, the hard tree, is it avoids the manipulation of, okay, who gets a buy. I had not, for years, I'd not even heard of a destructive buy, but eventually I did, and I was kind of curious about that. Sven, you had something to add.
We use single elimination here, and it's a destructive buy. And usually, the destructive buy, I would much rather fight someone in the tournament than the buy. They're usually
right.
And I've been parsed as the buy several times throughout the years by the crowd. So I would rather always get the tournament. Don't get the buy.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah,
because there's a whole difference in mindset when you have somebody that's relaxed and they're like, I don't want to win the tournament, I don't care, I'm just here to have fun, versus somebody who's in that very tense mindset of I want to do my best. There's a lot of nerves that go along with it. All other things being equal, I think the person who's of calm mindset has an advantage over the person who's nervous, and that's usually the combatant, not the buy fighter.
So ultimately, just as a fighter, as a person, I'm not going to say I'm a frequent participant in crowns. I've only fought in seven crown list in 30 something years. So I'm not a frequent fighter in crown. But my mindset going into crown is I could care less who I have to fight. If it was up to me, I would fight everybody to prove that it was my day. If you lined up all however many other people there was in the list, I would fight them all and compare records.
The pool type format.
I go into that list thinking I have to fight everybody, and I'm not surprised if I do. Who I get and when I get. So it's a preparing myself to compete in Crown List. So it would not bother me personally that I got a destructive buy or that I got I feel like I have to get through that challenge anyway.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, we could probably do a whole episode on tournament formats and the differences and how to even look at going into a tournament. And I've run across quite a few people that as they go into a crown, they're like, I'm hoping I get an easy path to the semis, right? But it's like, that's kind of the wrong mindset to have, because you realize you're just holding on by your fingernails, that you're really not ready. You're just kind of, hoping that luck takes a bigger hand than your preparation or your skill. Sven, you had something, or was that Eli?
I have something.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I have observed over the years is that some methods are more transparent. Some structures, like a luck of the draw, a tree, or other things, they're more transparent to the populace. When there are things that are less transparent to the populace, such as a destructive buy just conveniently being inserted just at the right moment or wrong moment for somebody, it can have the appearance not of the people helping the crown, helping the kingdom. It can have the appearance of the tournament being controlled, rigged in some ways, to use an extreme word. And I know
Eli may have broken up with his connection there. I'll jump in real quick while he's reconnecting. Yes, it does feel like the heavy hand of the crown, but is that any heavier a hand than the crown saying, I'm not going to let you fight in my list?
That's a good question. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about it earlier, of, basically I was reflecting on how I would feel. And I guess life is like that. It's not so much what you do, it's how you do it. I guess I would rather have privately a crown come to me and say, Tristan, I don't think you and your consort are ready to reign at this point. Here are the concerns we have. I could respect that more than I could say, Ailgheanan's now going to come and rip your head off.
Right.
Or I drive to the tournament, or I go and they bring out a heavy duty guy that just completely takes me out of my boots. I think I'd feel a little bit more, I'd view that crown as being more honorable by being transparent with me and honest, than to kind of pull the passive aggressive maneuver of having a heavy hitter just say, all right, go take him out. One seems honorable and the other approach seems slimy to me, but that's just how I would view it. Sven, you had a point.
I disagree. I've been held out of a few crowns here, and Untitled traditionally does not hold a ton of people out of crown.
Sure.
I would rather get the shot to kill the guy. I mean, at least they let you in the door, right? And our lists are not published. They're sent to the crown the week before. They'll get published, so you have no idea who's fighting crown until the week of or the week before they'll announce it. And
sure.
Usually,
I suppose you do have a chance. I mean, you could always beat the heavy hitter. There is that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the ones I was held out of, I didn't have much communication with the crown. They were usually we're dissimilar, so they said you can't fight. And then I had one be like, we'd appreciate it if you didn't win. You're like, oh, I'm here with a shield, I'm not trying to win.
Sure.
But a lot of that is communication between what that person is looking for in the air, what they think they want for your kingdom. Because in the end, I'll be able, they can't just be like, you're not fighting. And sometimes, like Ailgheanan said, the crown will be like, hey, you drew this one guy. Because I'm a duke, so sometimes they ask me, are you going to dukel to him, or are you trying to kill him?
The intrigue.
Yeah. Like, we'll never know.
Yep.
I have a comment.
Sure. Eli.
I apologize. My internet connection seems to be unstable tonight. And I may drop out at any second. But it looks like you continued once I disappeared, talking about transparency. And it's part of a philosophy of the Crown having responsibility and taking responsibility to speak to people rather than doing something that is, in legal terms, a law of attainder, which I saw over the years, where somebody will write a law or a rule and it's aimed at a specific person, instead of the Crown taking responsibility of going and talking to that person, which I would rather see, because the first is somebody hiding behind the rule, the Crown hiding behind the rules, and the second is the Crown actually giving people a chance to grow and learn. But again, philosophy, there are different ways of doing things. I always think that transparency is important, but one of the challenges that we've often all faced is having to pick up the pieces for a Crown who is less than competent, but in doing so in a way that keeps
Ooh, I'm not entirely sure where he's going with this one, so I'm not really, I don't know that I can try to complete his thought.
I'm sorry, I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah.
Great, you can do it yourself.
So picking up the piece, peers pick up the pieces for the Crown, and so as not to ruin the enjoyment for the populace of what they're doing. The problem is people don't know how it all runs behind the scenes and how it works. They don't know how a list table runs. They don't know how court is set up. They don't know how the business of the kingdom is managed. They don't know all of this stuff. They see the show a lot of times. And so I feel of two minds about protecting the populace by keeping the dirty linen in the closet, but also respecting people's right to know and be informed. So I'm not offering an answer here. I'm just saying it's complicated, and I recognize that it's complicated, and I understand that. So,
well, and that's kind of the format of the elephant in the room, are the questions that people have. They're curious, but they know that this is something that's not normally talked about. There is the dirty laundry behind the curtain, and there's an active interest in not just airing it all out, but also seeing that things run smoothly, as smoothly as possible, without looking like more drama than is needed.
So, I have some examples that I can try to throw in without actually being specific, because I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. But, in my reigns, I always took it to who fought in Crown List and who was potentially going to be our heirs very seriously. It's the most stressful part for me of any reign is hoping to get great heirs, hoping to get someone that's going to be fun to travel with, that's going to be of enough of a similar mindset that there's a very easy transition from one crown to the next. And I know that it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, if the Crown doesn't like their heirs, they can just not hang out, and interact with each other minimally. But it made my reigns more special that I actually had a bond and a connection with the heirs, and that I had with the preceding crowns. Friendships formed out of those relationships that are some of the strongest friendships and relationships that I have. And they started off as basically kingdom business. I was an heir, they were the Crown, or I was the Crown and they were our heirs. And, I'm very glad to have had the experiences that I had. And I felt that it was appropriate when Crown List was coming up, if there was someone who was going to be an entrant that was a contender, I only had to do this, I felt like a couple of times over all the times that I did it. But, as I said before, I went to them face to face. I pulled them aside somewhere at an event and I talked to them and I said, I just don't think it's in the best interest of the kingdom right now that you, that you be a part of the ongoing royal powers. I think you and the kingdom need a break from each other, and I'm, the people that I've had to do this were some of the closest, it was an extremely close friend. But because I went and I respectfully and I asked them, please don't put a letter in, I think we were able to maintain the friendship. Had they put a letter in and I had to deny them, you hear all the time about where people get denied entry into Crown and the bitter feuds that come from that. It is the Crown's prerogative. And on one hand, you can say, well, it's the Crown's prerogative and it's no problem to me. And a lot of people might put that face on, but I've heard the private conversations too. That SOB held me out of Crown for no damn good reason. And they're my sworn blood enemy, and we've seen that. All of us have seen that, in our experiences in the SCA where bitter feuding relationships happen because of these kinds of things. So I don't know if any of these are more right than another. I fall into the Crown should take personal responsibility and go meet it head on and try to have a discussion and try to head it off at the pass.
We have another question from Facebook. It says, for a glimpse behind the curtain, what challenges are there for the Crown when they don't mesh well with the heirs? I guess I'm not exactly clear what that is.
I can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, Eli, maybe you could touch on that.
Well, yeah, and I apologize in case I drop off again. I'll try to be brief, as difficult as that is. So if the Crown and heirs do agree, they can work as a unit, as one royal family, and extend the reach of the Crown and be very effective. It's good training for the heirs as well. If they don't, and I've seen this happen, where the heirs would say, well, your majesties can do that, but we'll just undo it. We'll just reverse it. We will undo everything you do. We don't agree with that. We won't let you fight in Crown. And I've seen well, at a distance, I was on the board, had to deal with this, kingdoms where there were two households and they traded Crown back and forth and then tried to keep people in the other household out of Crown, and then someone would get in and then change it. It's not just when they don't mesh, it's not just a problem for the Crown. It can become a problem for the administration of the kingdom and for the enjoyment of the society by the populace in the kingdom. So things like record keeping too. I've seen heirs who all the records, the regalia, other stuff, they were irresponsible with it, and it had to be recovered.
We got another hiccup. Yeah.
Do we want to try to finish this thought? Or
yeah, when he was describing that, and I've seen kind of the same thing of that snowball rolling down the mountain, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, where you have a kingdom that the factionalization starts to get pretty severe. I guess that's the nature of feuds and grudges and things like that can amplify over time. Oh, Eli's back. Maybe you'd like to.
Yeah, I mostly finished it. It was just finishing the last sentence. Those are some of the kinds of problems. It's not just a problem for the Crown when they don't get along with their heirs. It can be really bad. And it sounded like, Tristan, like you were saying, that it can lead to long-term factionalism. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that before as well. And it can get really bad. And if you think you've seen bad stuff in your kingdom or in other kingdoms, the people on the board and society level see all the bad stuff from everywhere. And so it's best that this is one of the reasons why as Ailgheanan said, your own crown tournament is one of the things you have the least control over the day of, which is why crowns want to meet the challenge head on and talk to people who, in the crown's judgment, which is their responsibility, are not suited at that time to reign. But the day of, people are fighting, and the crown should not interfere in individual fights. Leave it to the fighters, leave it to the marshals, let that happen, because that looks bad for the crown. It looks like real interference on the part of the crown. So that's I'm going to stop before I disappear again.
And we could tap into a whole nother episode there of what a royal tournament and running it can be like. And I will say, having had a coronet tournament that I hosted, that was probably one of the most nerve-wracking things, knowing that I had no control over what was happening. I just had to sit and abide by whatever the result was. And I'm sure anybody that has had their own crown tournament has likewise been, it's very anxiety. It creates a lot of anxiety.
Hey, Tristan, can I ask Sven a question?
Yeah, please.
Your Grace, I've had a lot of pleasure watching your career, watching you come into the SCA, just blister through those early years as a fighter, and then on your way to knighthood, and then on your way to reigning a number of times now. But you've had some hiccups along the way in your kingdom where, maybe someone didn't want you to fight in the next crown and held you out. How does that make you feel? And, have you held someone out for basically the same reasons? They held you out, so you held them out, kind of a thing? If it's not going to embarrass you or anything, I'd just like to know kind of how some of that has played out.
Well, as a whole, that foam fighting has a very negative attitude from most SCA people. And I did foam for a very long time before I come over here, and knew quite a few SCA people. And so I get a lot of negative talk from them. And once I came over and was pretty good at fighting, I like to say that it didn't get any better. There's still a lot of negativity, a lot of, well, you didn't do it our way. And I was a knight in just over 2 years, some change, and won my first crown by 3. And the big thing about winning crown so soon is I can remember people who were dicks to us when we were new. And it wasn't so bad early on. It became more judgmental when there were more of us, when Rags and Crumpet and all my guys started coming. Because one guy's tolerable, was not.
Right.
And we were told we were here to steal people's awards and, like make an amp guard and all that stuff. There's definitely a lot of hazing and people not being nice. And the first reign, we definitely tried to be as traditional as we could and follow all, everything that we had seen being done. And it didn't take long for us to figure out that people just didn't want you to be successful. They just wanted to bring problems to you and try to make it worse. It seemed like mainly royal peers and other people who felt like they should have power or say. And
do you find that to be the strong traditionalist?
Yes. Yeah.
Just really set in their ways.
And as a whole, remember, I'm one of our younger knights here. There's not a ton of young knights, and I'm 44. There's not more than a handful that are younger than I am. Some of my guys. It was definitely different. And I got held out by the first time. Well, I got held out the first time because I got to the top 8, and they didn't want an unbelt to win. We've only had a couple unbelts win. Inman forever and a day ago, and Prepman won behind me. They held me out one of the reigns before that, and then the one that I got knighted at when you came out to see us, I had to accept getting knighted at that event, or they wouldn't let me fight in crown tournaments. It's weird. That's just winning as an unbelt here is not really done. It definitely has less of a stigma now than it did then, but definitely the people who held me out, I definitely helped them out. I was just like, and whether that's petty or not, to me it was more of a tit for tat. A couple people held us out, and then they wanted to use our household as shock troops, and we were like, no, the crown's not going to support us. We're going to take 6 months off.
Well, I think any particular solution has got its downsides, and that what you're talking about is the disadvantage of having people that will hold others out of their crown tournament for, basically personal reasons. And, I don't think there's ever a perfect solution. They all have their compromise.
And a lot of it, Andrew, and I spent a lot of time when I was newer. I met him when I was relatively new, and we brought a lot of newer things to a traditionalist kingdom, and it didn't go over well. And some of that could be my fault. Some of that was just how our kingdom was. I think it's changed for the better. I mean, 11 years now, we definitely probably washed down better with Coke than we did back then.
Right. No, I mean, anyone who's been in the SCA for more than a few years knows how traditionalist, the SCA is, even though sometimes if you do it twice, it's a tradition, something could become a tradition almost overnight. And sometimes it's not always the traditions aren't always, particularly good. There's traditions, I feel like, that the SCA has in some places that need to be examined and moved through. There's some strong patriarchal kinds of things that happen the way some kingdoms do things in the SCA that, leans a little too close to misogyny for my taste. And, it's sort of the crowns are equal. The crown and the consort are equal. Wink, wink. It's like, don't you dare wink at me when you say that. If they're not equal, you and I are going to fight.
Yeah.
So some of the traditions that were cool, we developed neat, fun things all along the way. I think the thing that we lost sight of is that we get to keep coming up with new traditions. We get to innovate. We get to, as long as we keep our hearts open, we should be able to accept new and different things. And if they're meant to be traditions, then they will catch on. And, but it's super easy for people to just latch on to the way things were done a few years ago and want it to happen that way the rest of their lives. So much less those people who can remember the way they were done the first 10, 15 years of the SCA and have a very difficult time coming to grips with a new and modern society. So I on behalf of traditionalists everywhere, because a part of me is a big, strong traditionalist too, Sven, I apologize for some of the troubles that you've run through, but I also am glad to hear that it's getting better.
Well, some of it comes down to you're talking about your patriarchal society and all that stuff. A lot of it stems from that might makes right opinion that some people have played for a while. They're like, well, I'm the better fighter, so obviously it's going to be the way we want it to be. And some people don't do well being challenged in that. And for me, everybody's got their own SCA. I'm not trying to harsh on what they do. What makes SCAs fun for them, that's great. What makes SCA fun for me, I tell people, don't worry about other people's SCA. You worry about yours and making people have fun. I was like, it is what it is. That's all I have to
Eli,
say.
you have a comment.
Yeah, I think traditions are significant. They're important. It's in some ways easier as crown to change laws than it is to change traditions. But I think all of us who have reigned have had a hand in evolving a tradition or changing it or starting a new one. And you're going to, no matter what you do, if you do something, you're going to get, as crown, you're going to get pushback. If you don't do anything as crown, you're going to get pushback. Some people are going to dislike what you do or what you don't do. So going ahead, using your best judgment, being respectful of people, being respectful of tradition, but seeing how they work and how they don't work, and offering to help guide that, to change it where needed and to leave it where it should be left. That's one of the responsibilities of the crown. It's one of the responsibilities we all have, to say, this is working as it is. This is, hey, what about this? Isn't this working? And to be open to it. The same way Ailgheanan says, hey, be open to the way different ways things are done. Be open with not just different ways things are done in different kingdoms, be open to different ways your own kingdom can do things that can be better. I've seen a lot of not invented here syndrome. We can't do it that way because they do it in that other place. Well, no, they do it in that other place and it works. Why don't we do something like that here? And yeah, I can, I think it's important. I think tradition is important. People in Mark's time, and one example, and hopefully it won't drop out, is the difference between kingdoms that have set oaths of fealty and kingdoms that don't. And because I've lived in both. And the kingdoms that have, like the middle has a set oath of fealty, say, those, how it's meaningful, it's substantial. Everybody who's recited this for decades adds to the meaning of it and the impact of it, and you're connected to all those people. Those people who make up their own, how can that mean anything? Whereas in the kingdoms where the oaths are not set, they say, oh, those kingdoms that have a set oath, they're just repeating things without it having any meaning. But here, it's all very personal. It's what I am personally swearing to, and it's more meaningful. And the lack of understanding between those two different traditions is significant. That's not hurting anything. Both are good and both have meaning. And it's a matter of understanding how things can be done. As Ailgheanan said, different doesn't necessarily mean bad. I know we may all make our value judgments. I certainly make mine, but it's worth reminding ourselves other kingdoms have their own ways of doing things, and they have reasons for that. And if you don't know the reasons, you don't know why the tradition exists. Understand the reasons behind the way people do things that are different from the way you do them, and you'll begin to understand the people better too.
Yeah.
I didn't drop out.
Yeah, you kept
Yay.
on. That was great. When it comes to traditions, I think that, martial arts has fallen to this as well, where abiding by a rigid tradition can lead to stagnation. It tends to overlook innovation or evolution. And I loved your use of the term evolution. When you evolve things, if something comes along that really is truly better, you should grow to adopt the things that do work better. And I would echo the fact, I came up in the mid-realm as well. The knight's oath that was standard for everybody, it was powerful to see 30, 40 knights all recite the same oath together. There really isn't a more powerful, a better version of that we've seen yet. And so that's a fabulous tradition. But, if we looked at the cars we drive as tradition, why would we stop driving Model A's? Because there was never anything better. That's obviously a ridiculous thing. If we talk about, tournament formats, or the way that people are invited to crown tourney, or the way that they're accepted by the crown to fight in tourney, it's one of those things that we can always explore. Perhaps there is a slightly better way that we can do it. I've been lucky to see some other kingdoms and how their formats are. I've seen the advantages and disadvantages. I haven't seen any that are what seem to be as obviously wrong. They just seem okay. I see how you're trying to solve this issue or this problem in a way that you feel is effective. But again, you remove the value judgment to say, I understand kind of what you're going for here. But any living thing in an organization is just like a human being or a plant or an animal. You're either growing or you're dying, and you can't just hang in the middle and go along. And so the idea that you're evolving, the traditions can evolve, something can come along that is very powerful and it seems better. Be willing to embrace those things that are better. I guess that would be my perspective of, I do like tradition because it's reliable. There's a certain amount of stability that tradition brings, but innovation also brings excitement, and it brings new experiences, and that is valuable to an organization as well. Anybody? Hope I didn't end it on that.
No, that was well said. So what I'd like to just sort of reiterate a lot of what we've all said all program long. There's a lot of different ways to skin this fish, and it's great. I think I personally have been thrilled to go to other kingdoms and find out what they're doing and kind of explore some of how they do stuff. So I think it's really neat. And that kind of leads a little bit into a promo that I'd like to do for next week's program. We're starting a new series called Heroes and Traditions, and we're starting off with the Kingdom of the West. And in an hour and a half, I hope to try to very quickly move through exploring some of the innovators from each of the major periods of the Kingdom of the West. I believe Tristan will be joining that broadcast, and we're going to have His Grace Thorfinn of the West and Viscount Eliahu of the West, and we're going to try to knock out the first 14 years very quickly of the Kingdom of the West, and then kind of hit every 10 years after that, every decade after that, and talk about some of the fighters that have have brought in fighting traditions and fighting styles, and we'll talk about some of the coaches from each of those periods, and then hopefully we'll have enough time at the end to talk about some of the today's current trainers and fighters who are making the Kingdom of the West the fantastic place that it is for fighting. And then each month we're going to try to jump in and do a different kingdom, and we'll work our way through precedents. And hopefully it'll be a lot of fun for folks. But we've talked an awful lot about traditions today, and we will certainly talk about some next week as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that show. I'm not sure if I'm on that one, because I looked at it and I'm like, I'm not familiar with the West very much. One of my housemates is from the West, but I wish I was more familiar. In fact, I'm looking forward to listening to that show to hear of the characters and the figures. I mean, obviously Duke Paul of Bellatrix is definitely going to be at the top of the list, if not number one, of the influences that come out of that kingdom. But it's going to be a fascinating show. I think everybody should check it out.
Well, if you get a wild hair, you can join me, because I plan on mostly just asking questions.
Yeah, questions are great.
I don't have any stories from the West. I've never lived there, so I intend to try to drive the program a little bit, and then hopefully ask insightful questions, and then move us into the next part, and let the people who can tell us about the West tell us about the West.
Absolutely. So we're kind of wrapping it up. Does anybody have any final thoughts they would like to impart before we end the episode? Duke Eli?
No.
I
don't want to disappear again.
Eli
so
doesn't have anything more to add.
Yeah, I do, but if I start talking about it, I'll disappear again. So thanks, and good talking with all of you.
Yep. Thank you, Eli. Duke Sven, you had your finger up.
Yeah, for all the talk that about the negativity and stuff I got early on, it's really what convinced me to travel in the SCA and go and meet other people and try their kingdom traditions and everything out and see what was going on, and help me enjoy the SCA more. What's up, 3-year-old? Yeah, that's fun. Constantine. No, it helped me to see the SCA as a whole. Helps you break apart kingdom areas. I've found in today's SCA there's not as much cross traveling. You don't run across a lot of people fight in other areas. Like living out here, I've done my best to fight in all the kingdoms that I get to pretty easy in the last 10 years. I took a few years off, but I still try to travel a ton, and I think that helps you get your love for what made the SC fun for you first. When people burn out, still find new things that make it fun, find new people. That's how I met Ailgheanan when he put the wood to me at Gulf Wars so long ago.
Oh, very nice. Well, thank you, Sven, for joining us tonight. This has been great having you on. All right, so I think with that, I want to wrap up by thanking Saib for being our engineer behind the scenes and getting us set up and taking care of the Zoom administration. So thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
Anytime.
thank you for the hosts, Ailgheanan, Eli, Sven. It's always great to talk with you guys. Sven, it was nice meeting you. I think this is the first time we've gotten the chance to cross paths, but very much appreciated. And I hope we got to everybody's question. If you have a question after the show, if you're not live, if you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to post a comment either in the Facebook group or on the YouTube page, and we will try to get to your question. With
All
that,
right.
Saib, do you have anything to wrap us up with?
Nope, just gonna say thanks to everyone that tuned in on Facebook, and hopefully see everybody next week.
Excellent. Yeah, come and check out the Ailgheanan's new series on the was it the Great Fighters of the West or the
What Heroes and Traditions?
Heroes and Traditions of the West Kingdom. Yep. So it'll be the first in a series. So come and check that out.
All right, good night, everybody.
Yep. Have a good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.